Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the fourth of 5 online lectures discussing the Liturgy of the Hours, hosted by the Society for Catholic Liturgy. I'm Dr. Mike Brummond, and I serve on the board of the Society. A reminder that this session is being recorded, and a Q&A session will follow today's talk. So please utilize the question and answer, the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen to submit any questions. Feel free to do so during the lecture as well, so we can address them in a systematic way at the conclusion of the talk. These online lectures serve in part to prepare us for our upcoming 2026 annual conference, which will be held at Notre Dame Seminary in New Orleans this September 23rd to the 25th. The conference is titled Made Holy by the Praises of God, the Liturgy of the Hours in the Life of the Church. This theme is timely in that it occurs as the Church in the United States prepares to adopt a new English translation of the Liturgy of the Hours. You can register for the conference at our website, liturgysociety.org/conference. On that same page, you will find information about our keynote speakers, discounted hotel room rate, a draft schedule, and more. Lastly, the final online lecture will be on Tuesday, June 18th at 3 p.m. Eastern, when Monsignor Mark Karen will speak on celebrating the hours in the diocesan and parochial contexts. If you missed our previous lectures, they are available on our YouTube channel, which can be found at youtube.com/@Liturgy Society. Today's presentation is on the beauty of holiness, depictions of the divine office in medieval manuscripts, and given by Father Innocent Smith. Father Smith, OP, is assistant professor of theology at the University of Notre Dame. After undergraduate studies in music and philosophy at Notre Dame, he entered the Order of Preachers in 2008 and was ordained a priest in 2015. Father Innocent served in parish ministry for several years before completing a doctorate in liturgical studies at the University of Regensburg in 2021. After teaching for several years in Baltimore and Washington, D.C., he joined the Department of Theology in Notre Dame in 2025. His research focuses on the material and musical aspects of medieval liturgical books, as well as the relationship between liturgy and theology. Father Innocent, thank you for presenting today.
It's such a pleasure to be with you all today. I'm very grateful to the Society for Catholic Liturgy for the invitation to give this lecture. I'm just going to share my screen here. Let's see. My talk today is titled The Beauty of Holiness, Depictions of the Divine Office in Medieval Manuscripts. Just to start off with here, we've got a lovely image of these Dominican nuns praying the Liturgy of the Hours. We'll return to this image and its broader context later on in the session. I'd like to begin with a few words about the Psalter, because that's really the core, in one sense, of the Liturgy of the Hours. So St. Paul in the letter to the Colossians says, "Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, as in all wisdom you teach and admonish one another, singing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs with gratitude in your hearts to God. And whatever you do, in word or in deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him." I think these two verses from St. Paul give us a profound theology of the divine office. They help us to understand that it's Christ who is dwelling in us through the scriptures, but that Christ allows us to be his voice. He speaks to us, we speak back to him, and we also speak to one another. We exhort and teach and admonish one another with psalms, hymns, and spiritual canticles. But ultimately, this is a matter of giving thanks to God the Father through Christ. We're not alone in the Liturgy of the Hours. We're always in and with Christ. Here in this image, we're seeing a particularly early Psalter from around the year 500. In this period, the Psalter was a text. As we'll see in this talk, the text of the Psalms often gave rise to beautiful images in order to help people to be devoted in the midst of their prayers. Just to point out one particularly beautiful aspect, though, of this text-only version of the Psalter, this is Psalm 116, one of the shortest psalms. Praise the Lord, all you nations. Laudate Dominum omnes gentes. And we see the name of the Lord being written in red. So it's a reminder to us of the grandeur of what we're invited to in praying the Liturgy of the Hours. So the Psalms are 150 in number, or 151 if you take some medieval psalters, but for the most part, 150. And there's different ways of dividing the psalter. One early division of the Psalter is to divide it evenly into three parts. So to think of Psalm 1 to 50, Psalm 51 to 100, and then Psalm 101 to 150. Sorry, I've got a typo on the screen there. So this tripartite division of the Psalter into three parts is an important one for the decoration of the Psalter, as we'll see. But Christians gradually developed another way of dividing the Psalter, which is based on the order of psalms read or sung in the divine office in the Roman tradition. So this is sometimes called in scholarship the secular cursus. So secular here in the sense of opposed to monastic. So in the secular cursus, the psalms are divided into which psalms groupings are read at matins and vespers. So if you go through the days of the week, matins traditionally began with Psalm 1 on Sunday morning. And then various psalms were read at matins. And then the next day you would take up again with Psalm 26. Then on Tuesday, Psalm 38. Psalm 52 on Wednesday, Psalm 68 on Thursday, Psalm 80 on Friday, and so forth. And then there was another cycle for Vespers. So you would sing essentially the second half of this, or the final third, Psalm 109 to 113 on Sunday, and then the rest of the Psalms up until the other days of the week. At the midday hours, you would have other Psalms being read as well. So this is a sort of simplified overview. We'll see why this division is important in a moment. But just to be aware of another way of dividing the Psalms that's an important part of Christian liturgical history, the monastic cursus. So the rule of St. Benedict gives a particular list of which Psalms are said on which day, and scholars seem to be of the opinion that the monastic cursus is a simplification or an adaptation of the traditional Roman cursus. So the Psalms are divided in slightly different ways, and for our purposes, it's relevant to see that the Matin Psalms are completely different in terms of where they start. So, why is it important to know about these different ways of dividing the Psalms throughout the week in order to understand the illumination or the illustration of the divine office in medieval manuscripts? Well, essentially, medieval bookmakers would put special decorations on these different divisions of the Psalms as a way of helping the reader to navigate, to know, okay, it's Tuesday, so let me find the Psalm. So as you flip through your book, you can find the right page if you turn, if you kind of know this order of Psalms. So I'm going to illustrate this basic tradition with a particularly beautiful manuscript from the early 13th century, the Psalter of Blanche de Castile. So this one's in the Arsenal Library in Paris, and it was made in the first half of the 13th century, probably around 1230. It's a modestly sized manuscript, about 280 by 200 millimeters, so more or less the size of this nifty little book of Psalms. It was likely commissioned by Blanche de Castile. So Blanche was a fascinating person. She was the wife of Louis VIII, the mother of Saint Louis, and she served as the regent of France from 1226 to 1234. So quite significantly, the time when people think this manuscript was made was when she was serving as the regent of France for her son, who was not yet old enough to be the king. And so this image we're seeing here on the right is probably a portrait of Blanche kneeling in front of an altar. We'll return to this image a little bit later. One of the supporting pieces of evidence for associating the Psalter with Blanche is a particular prayer in a section at the end of the Psalter, which uses feminine words and pronouns in order to refer to a sinful woman, a miserable sinner. So this is a prayer in which she's asking for mercy from God. And so if this psalter had been made for a man, it would have used a different form. Rather than miserimum peccatricem, it would have been miserimum peccatorum or something like that. So basically, the images of this woman praying, and then the text supports this sense of it being made for Blanche of Castile. So what's in this Psalter? What would Blanche have seen when she prayed with this book? Well, I'm going to walk us through the illuminated initials in this Psalter so we can get a sense of the range of traditional iconography. So, starting in the 12th century, a whole standard range of ways of illustrating different psalms started to develop. So, Blanche's Psalter is part of this longer tradition. So if we look at Psalm 1, which is the opening psalm for Sunday Matins, the text is Beatus vir, blessed is the man who hath not walked in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stood in the way of sinners, nor sat in the chair of pestilence. So here, Blanche would have seen this image of King David sitting and dictating the Psalms. So we have a scribe who's writing with his right hand with a quill. He's got in his left hand this scraper in case he makes a mistake. So first we see David in his traditional attribution as the one who decrees the Psalms themselves. And then here at the bottom, there's an illustration of the same man, King David, but now he's avoiding sitting down in a chair. So this is the chair of pestilence. So this is a rather unusual artistic depiction to link David not only with composing or singing the Psalms, but also with having the prudence to live out what the Psalms themselves imply. Of course, one very important Christian tradition of reading the Psalms is to see the blessed man as being Christ himself. So David, as the precursor of Christ, is also being invoked here. And we're going to see that theme return at several points throughout this Psalter. So once we turn to Monday Matins, we have Psalm 26. So in this case, Dominus illuminatio mea. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the protector of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? So in this case, we have David being anointed by Samuel in the presence of his father Jesse. And we have this hand of the father coming down and blessing. So here down at the bottom, I love these little sheep here. So one thing to point out here is there's not a specifically musical or liturgical theme going on here, but of course we can see the anointing of David as being a precursor of the baptism of Christ, the anointing of Christ, making him Christus, the anointed one. And in a certain sense, this mountain could almost be read like a little stream, like we see Christ being depicted in that context. So here we can see that there's a typological reading that's being encouraged through the images themselves. When we go on to Psalm 38, the beginning of Tuesday Matins, we have the Psalm Dixi custodiam vias meas. I said, I will take heed of my ways, that I sin not with my tongue. I have set a guard on my mouth when the sinner stood against me. So here we have another theme connected with this particular psalm. So he's keeping a guard on his tongue, lingua mea. So David here is depicted holding his hand over his mouth, and the devil here is trying to tempt him into some sort of betrayal or ill-timed word. So this is significant when we think about the divine office as primarily consisting of the words we offer back to God using our voices. So the psalm and this image are reminding us of the need for our whole being to be redirected to God Himself. In this next one, we get not a division of the liturgical psalter, but a reference to this tripartite division, this threefold division of the Psalms. So in this case, Psalm 51 isn't the beginning of a new liturgical hour, but many psalters in the 12th and 13th century would refer to this older division by having an extra illuminated initial. So in this case, we have quid gloriaris in malitia. Why dost thou glory in malice, thou that art mighty in iniquity? And here the illuminator has chosen to depict David and Goliath. So we're kind of going back and forth in different moments of David's life. There's this wonderful violence to the stone that has already hit Goliath's head. And the blood is bursting out. But this lets us think about the way in which we are taking part in God's own battle when we are praying the Psalms. We pray with Him, He's working in and through us. The very next psalm, Psalm 52, is the start of Wednesday Matins. So here we're returning to the liturgical cursus. So in this case, it's the psalm begins, Dixit incipiens in corde suo non est Deus. This fool said in his heart, there is no God. So here, a traditional depiction is to show a fool, but here they've chosen, it seems, to show David himself, struggling, being tempted by these two devils, trying to convince him to declare that there is no God. But David seems to be resisting this temptation. He's got his finger upwards. Again, here we can think about these typological readings of Christ being tempted in the wilderness by the devil, and yet sticking to the true words of Scripture. Thursday Matins begins with Psalm 68. So in this case, Salvum me fac are the opening words in Latin. Save me, O God, for the waters are come even unto my soul. So here we have David almost drowning with this set of water, and he's praying up to the Lord. So he's praying to what seems to be God or the divine majesty, depicted in a way that might remind us of Christ himself. It's interesting here as well to think about that earlier image we saw of David being anointed. Well, I mentioned that had a link with Christ being baptized. Here we see David in the stream in a way that's quite similar to the way Christ is often depicted at his baptism. So again, we've got this multiplicity of typological imagery going on. This next psalm for Friday Matin, Psalm 80, Exultate Deo Auditori Nostro, is also trying to illustrate not the opening words alone, but the first several verses of the psalm. So in this case, rejoice to God our helper, sing aloud to the God of Jacob, take a psalm and bring hither the timbrel, the pleasant psaltery and the harp. Blow up the trumpet on the new moon, on the noted day of your solemnity. So here we have a traditional depiction of David playing different instruments, but he's not alone. He's joined by, he's playing these timbrels, hitting these little bells up here. And then we've got a man playing some sort of trumpet, and then a little boy with another kind of tin whistle or some sort of recorder. So if you've got experience of yourself or your children playing recorders, you can think about how this, whatever it sounds like, it might be part of praise of God, ultimately speaking. Once we turn to Psalm 97, the last matins of the week for Saturday, we get the most explicitly liturgical depiction in this manuscript. So in this case, the psalm is Cantate Deo Canticum Novum. So sing to the Lord a new song, because he hath done wonderful things. His right hand hath wrought for him salvation, and his arm is holy. So, as we're going to see throughout the rest of this talk, Psalm 97 becomes one of the central moments in medieval manuscripts for depicting singing in particular. Sometimes it's singing at Mass, sometimes it's singing at the Divine Office, sometimes it's more ambiguous singing. In this case, it's not totally clear. We have these two clerics singing at a lectern. There's a fulsome depiction of the liturgical space. So, there's an altar here, but nothing's on the altar. There's not a cross, there's not a chalice, and yet there's this cross that seems to be affixed to it. This character sitting in the background is kind of interesting. He seems to be in a deacon's robe rather than the copes of the two singers, and he seems to be holding a gospel book. So it's possible that this one is depicting more of a mass liturgy rather than the divine office, but it's not totally clear. But we're going to see once we finish with this manuscript a huge range of ways of depicting the singing at the lectern with the Domino psalm. But first, just to complete our tour through this manuscript, with Psalm 101, we have the not Saturday Matins, as I've mistakenly written here, but rather one of the traditional divisions of the Psalms themselves. So this is the third of the tripartite division. So this is that same image we saw of what seems to be Blanche de Castile. So she's kneeling in front of an altar. She has a book at her feet. This book might be, in fact, representing the Psalter itself. And she's praying before the altar. She's praying to the Divine Majesty, who's depicted quite similarly to what we saw earlier with David or in the water praying up to God. It's fascinating the way that Blanche is both in and out of the image. Her feet go beyond the frame of the painting itself. So it's a little bit of a kind of clever thing. When we think about her perhaps kneeling, praying with this book, seeing herself in this image, it's a reminder that she's outside of the page. She's in the world, but this book is helping her enter into the fullness of this divine mystery. So with Psalm 109, we have the final traditional division of the Psalter for liturgical purposes. And so this is for the first psalm of Sunday Vespers. So Dixit Dominus, Domino meo, sede a dextris meis. The Lord said to my Lord, sit thou at my right hand until I make thy enemies thy footstool. Excuse me. So one of the traditional depictions for this psalm is to show the Trinity itself. So in this case, the Father and the Son are depicted as completely identical in every way, except with different colors of their garments. So we've got a blue tunic and a red tunic, and then a red outer cloak and a blue outer cloak. And then the Holy Spirit is between them, perhaps in a very subtle way, showing the filioque concept that he's proceeding from the Father and the Son. And they're both sitting on this bench and holding these books, making these identical gestures. So this tradition of depicting the identical Father and Son rather than the old Father and the young Son is really kind of, I think, building on this scriptural idea of the Son as the perfect image of the Father, the one who leads us to see the Father himself. It's interesting as well the way these two figures, they're both fully within the frame, and yet their feet are both outside and inside the D. So this artist is, in a very subtle way, kind of showing the immanence as well as the transcendence of the divine being, how God has created us from outside of creation, but yet in the incarnation has entered into our own world ourselves. So that gives you a sense of this traditional range of iconography. As we've seen, Psalm 97 is a very traditional place to have depictions of the divine office. So what I now want to do for the main portion of this talk is to walk us through a huge range of French, English, and Italian Bibles, psalters, various forms of liturgical books and I'm going to focus on the way Psalm 97 is shown with a huge range of imagery within this common theme of the singers at the pulpit. So I'm going to start, I'm going to go in roughly chronological order here. I'm going to start with a Latin Bible from the second quarter of the 13th century, produced in England. So the 13th century was a huge transition point where in the past, Psalters had been kind of the most produced book, but then the full Bible began to be produced on a mass scale, and many clerics as well as wealthy lay people were able to buy their own Bibles. So Oxford and Paris were the major centers at this period for the production of Bibles. So in this case, we have a beautifully illustrated English Bible. The text is in Latin, but made in England. And here we have a single singer illustrating Cantate Domino Canticum Novum for Psalm 97. So I love the way that this is kind of embossed, and the singer is looking straight up. He's praying to the Lord, so he doesn't really even need to look at the words anymore. This is also particularly detailed in terms of its neumes. So we can even see this Perectus here and various neumes. We could almost recreate which psalm or which chant is being sung. This is a relatively large Bible, sort of a medium-sized one. And we're going to see some of them are very small, some of them are very large. So pay attention a little bit to the range of sizes here. This next example I'd like to show is also made in England at the same period. This one we can associate with a particular painter called William de Brails, who is attested as working at Oxford. He was a layperson who worked very closely with the Dominicans as well as with other clerics who were at the newly founded University of Oxford. So in this case, we have three friars, it seems like, at a lectern. So this book we know was made for Dominicans because it includes a Dominican missal as one part of it. And here they're not quite wearing Dominican kappas. They're wearing, it seems like, the pluviale or the cope, and their copes are in different colors. So the two outer ones have black ones, the one in the or some sort of dark color. The one in the middle has a red one. This is a common feature of depictions of the liturgy in medieval manuscripts. They often are showing colors for liturgical vestments that alternate. And one perennial question for art historians and liturgical historians is, did people actually wear different colored vestments at the same liturgy, or is this an artistic convention? So that's kind of an open question. But here it's fun to see. There's also an attempt to depict music on the page. This one's much more abstracted, though, but it's an extremely small Bible, so you can think of just how tiny this little image is in real life. Here we have another Bible, this time produced in the middle of the 13th century in Paris. So this is kind of a standard mass-produced Bible in a certain way, but full of beautiful illustrations on a very modest scale, nonetheless. So here we have just two friars or two clerics. Note that they're both tonsured, and again we see this back and forth, the different colored copes, and they're both depicted at the lectern. In this case, it's an extremely small image in real life, so there's not very much detail. It's somewhat abstracted, and the artist hasn't made an attempt to kind of show us neumes or words on the page itself. Now we're moving into a Bible made in Naples. So Italy became a center of Bible production around the middle of the 13th century, whereas England and France had led the way earlier in the century. But we start to see really beautiful books produced in Naples and in Bologna and other parts as the 13th century progresses. So it's really quite detailed in its own way. It's not quite clear what sort of church they're in, but there's an attempt to show this singing within the liturgical context as well. I'd quite like to have a lectern like that, but it's also a little MC Escher like, so our mileage may vary with it. Here we have another Bible from Italy, this one produced in Bologna around 1267. So here we get quite a wild scene going on. It's at least six or seven people singing around, standing around a lectern. I love the way that the mouths are depicted in different ways. Some are singing quite loudly, it seems like. Others, this guy's confused. He's kind of trying to find his place. Some of these seem to be maybe Franciscans. Others seem to be maybe lay people wearing kind of nice clothing. There's no attempt here to to show a kind of liturgical, or rather the space that they're in, but rather this central figure of them singing to the Lord. And the music seems to be quite simple in this case, so just little dots in a relatively even manner. This is quite a big book, so probably more of a lectern-sized Bible rather than the more personal handheld ones that we were seeing earlier. So this is a much bigger image in real life than the one that we've been seeing otherwise. This one's particularly fun. This manuscript was produced in Bologna around the same time as the last one, and it tends to have two different types of images. So in this case, the illustration of Cantate Domino Canticum Novum is, instead of the singers, it's the nativity itself. So it's a different way of thinking about how to illustrate the Psalter, to see that it's really the incarnation of Christ that gives us a reason to sing. But this artist has chosen to show the same lectern theme, in this case in a miniature in the bottom. So this book was produced for Dominicans, but it has frequent depictions of both Dominicans and Franciscans, with really quite vivid depictions of their habits and other elements. And what seems to be happening here is a little bit of a friendly sing-off between the Franciscans and Dominicans. So note that the Franciscans, they're kind of all quiet, and Christ is giving a laurel or some sort of award to the Dominicans. So they seem to have won this contest. But in other parts of the book, we have more ironic depictions where for instance, the founders of the Franciscan and Dominican orders are presented. So I don't think we should take this as polemical, but rather a little bit of playfulness in the margins. This next example comes from Genoa in the north of Italy, second half of the 13th century. This manuscript, interestingly, depicts the people singing as wearing monastic, white monastic robes. So this is much just like those Dominicans and Franciscans were very clearly identifiable. These seem to be some form of white habited monks or white cloaked monks. Interestingly, the three are all gingers, but they've got their monastic tonsures as well. The stand here that they're singing from, the lectern, is rather architectural. So it's not quite as three-dimensional as some of the ones we've seen earlier, but it's got a rather heft to it. This next one is returning to the theme of the Psalter. So Psalter is a separate book rather than as part of the Bible as such. This is an extremely small manuscript produced at the end of the 13th century in Bologna, and it's interesting that it depicts seemingly. It's not quite clear if they're clerics or lay people. They're not wearing normal monastic robes, but they've got the tonsure. But here we can see, an attempt to depict some of this musical notation again. Looks almost like Arabic in certain ways, but it seems to probably be an attempt to do neumes. But we have this wonderful range of other figures, holding books or playing musical instruments. So it's kind of showing this range of experience within the psalm. This next one is we're moving now into the 14th century, and in the 13th and early 14th century, we begin to see vernacular translations of the Bible into other languages. So this is a Bible historiale. So it in fact gives the Psalms in French rather than in Latin. So Chante au Notre Seigneur, Nouvelle Chanson. So here we have David singing or kneeling, or perhaps it's some other king. But in a miniature, we have this group of clerics singing from a lectern. This one's extremely architecturally defined. So they're in the presence of an altar, and the altar has a tabernacle on it. And then this quite vividly depicted sense of the cloths that are surrounding the altar, and then this whole range of their robes. Note this kind of consistency of the alternating colors. That's really a theme that we're finding in lots of these, but really quite a wonderful depiction. Here, we're not quite seeing musical notation, but we get an attempt at words being written out on their lectern. So again, we don't know exactly is what type of liturgy is being depicted, but arguably it's some sort of solo going on. It's not clearly a mass happening here, so it's quite conceivably the divine office is being depicted. This next one gives us a glimpse into another form of singing. So this is a Anglo-Norman Bible, also written in French, but produced in England in the third quarter of the 14th century. So here we have a group of three older men and two younger choir boys, all at the same lectern. And it's fun to see that they're being rewarded with this scroll from, in this case, seemingly an angel. And there's quite a simple set of notation here on this particular lectern Bible that they're singing from. And then now we get the Psalter of Jean de Berry. So he was the owner and commissioner of a whole range of extremely beautiful manuscripts. So here again we get, so here it has a Latin and French bilingual edition of the Psalter. So you could think about this as being kind of a study text as well as a prayer text. So here we have the three clerics, which has often been one of the numbers given at the lectern, an altar not being used clearly for Mass, but so this suggests a divine office context. And in this case, we see that they're praying to God. So God is standing there holding the world, and then he's accompanied by this whole set of heavenly hosts. And then we've got some kind of different figures on the sides. But again, it's a reminder of that we're singing to the Lord, cantate Domino, but that it's the Lord is in heaven, that we're participating in this heavenly song as well. So this image, I think, is a beautiful depiction of the way in which heaven and earth meet in the Liturgy of the Hours. So I'd like to conclude by walking us through another Psalter, but this one that has a completely different way of depicting the divine office as part of its imagery. So this is the Psalter of Henry VI. It was produced in Paris in the first quarter of the 14th century, but for use of the King of England. And in this case, the artists have chosen to depict a whole range of religious communities praying the divine office. So rather than just using Psalm 97 as the only place to show the liturgy being celebrated, they rather put liturgical scenes with a whole range of other iconography. So for Psalm 1, for Sunday Matins, we get this rather mixed group of clerics singing in choir. So you can see some of them are having conversations with one another. There's a bishop here with his mitre. He seems to be rather focused, so that's good. But some of them are distracted from what they're doing. So there's a little bit of playfulness to this, but we can see this is seemingly a divine office celebration being depicted. The altar's in the background, but we just get a glimpse of it. And it's combined with this other set of traditional imagery of David playing the harp and other scenes. Unfortunately, I don't have high resolution parts for this other image, so it's a little bit harder for us to see. When we go on to Tuesday Matins, so we've skipped Monday, they don't choose to depict the theme here. They use the blank space for the opening of Tuesday Matins to depict a community of poor Clares, so Franciscan sisters. And these ones, they're much more edifying than the last group. They all seem focused on their books. But it is interesting how their books are bound differently. So some have red books, some have blue books. This, might quite be accurate. We're just switching from the red to the brown breviary at this point. So you can be sympathetic with that perhaps. Some of them seem. This one has her book upside down. It seems like, although it's maybe she's just trying to read it better. But we get this kind of very lifelike and humorous and yet more edifying depiction here of the divine office being chanted. And this is connected with Dixi Custodiam Vias Meas. I said, I will guard my ways. So in this case, we have the Blessed Virgin Mary holding Jesus and speaking to this little prince. So in this case, for Thursday Matins, for Salvum Me Fac, we get a Franciscan friars community here. So this is a bigger scene. It's akin to the one we saw for Psalm 1. So we get a glimpse of the altar and kind of more of an articulation of the church. And in this case, several of the friars don't have books, so they're seemingly praying from memory. But there's a unity that of their prayer in a way that's, I think, different than the secular clerics. For Friday Matins, for Exultate Deo, here we get this fascinating depiction of these white-habited people. It's not totally clear to me which religious order these are meant to be. They might be Carthusians, they might be, it's possible they're Dominicans, but their habits are not quite accurate for what a Dominican would be. But we get this scene of the different skulls behind as well. And so that's a kind of memento mori as well. Here we have a much more fully articulated altar, but again, it's clear Mass is not being celebrated in this particular depiction. So this seems to be the divine office. And they've got this whole range of books, red and blue books, similar to what we saw with the Poor Clares earlier. And then in the Exultate Deo scene, we have the coronation of Mary, and then this whole range of virgin saints and male saints as well, and all sorts of wonderful animals. It's a reminder that all of these different saints are sharing in this exaltation to God. The Saturday Matins gives us a wonderful image of Dominican nuns praying in choir. So they're all in a very accurate way with their white tunics and then their black kappas being depicted. And here we see a missal on the altar. So this one is arguably a depiction of Mass being celebrated. They may be singing the Gradual or the Alleluia or something like that, given that the missal's on the right side. On the other hand, it may well be just a depiction of the divine office as well, but with a book on the altar for some reason. This is one of the most fully articulated church scenes that we see in this manuscript, so it's a wonderful architectural glimpse as well. Unfortunately, we don't have a high resolution image for this cantate domino, but it seems to be some sort of group of singers in the midst of a dying bishop. Here we have Sunday Vespers, Psalm 109. And this time we don't get exactly religious praying the office, but we get this wonderful scene of King David surrounded by other prophets, it seems like, and they're all playing different musical instruments. It gives to me a little bit of a vibe of King Arthur and his round table. So it's kind of a fun scene here. And it's being paired with a Trinitarian image of the Son and the Father. So notice that here the Father is older than the Son. The Holy Spirit's not totally clearly depicted, but the Blessed Virgin Mary is kneeling here. Christ is showing off his wounds. So that's a wonderful scene in some medieval art of Christ reminding the Father of what he suffered. And Mary seems to be participating in this as well. So it's a kind of illustration of the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right. So to just offer a few words of conclusion, and then I'd love to hear some of your thoughts and comments and questions. What we've seen here is a range of depictions of the divine office. So some of them very clearly, explicitly, the divine office taking place. Some of them more generalized scenes of praying and singing. We've also seen a range of non-divine office images, but traditional depictions of different psalms, often depicting the opening words, sometimes in a very deeply theological way. So I think what we can conclude from all of this is that the beauty of our external bodies being involved in the liturgy is a real part of what's happening in the liturgy of the hours. So even if somebody's praying alone, they're not alone. They're praying in their body where they are, and they're united to the heavenly liturgy, as some of these images have shown us. But they're also, these images, I think, are a reminder of how the church really privileges the communal celebration of the office. That even though individuals can beautifully contribute to the prayer of the church, there's even more of a sign value to the gathering of two or three or more gathered in the name of the Lord. So I hope that this range of images we've seen might help you as you think about how is the Liturgy of the Hours, how is the Divine Office playing a role in your life, and how do these images help inspire us to devote ourselves anew to this exhortation of one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual canticles. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to our conversation.
Great. Thank you, Father Innocent, for sharing your expertise on a fascinating topic. So for our participants, please feel free to drop any questions in the tab there, the Q&A tab. As they're doing that, I did receive one offline. So the first question, Father Innocent, from Father Michael, he noted that the first Psalter, the first manuscript that you shared with us, was made for a lay woman. And so he asks, what are your hopes or worries or thoughts on promoting the newly translated breviary for the lay faithful?
Yeah, so I think that the divine office is something that the church imposes or invites with requirement clerics and religious to pray as a duty and as a privilege. But the church also invites all members of the church, all the lay faithful, to join themselves to that prayer. And the Second Vatican Council deputes all of the faithful to join themselves to this prayer, but doesn't require it. So I think it's really important to respect that important distinction between everybody being invited, but nobody being required. Because I think that's a different thing than for clerics and religious, but it's sort of a supererogation, but it can be a really beautiful way of letting your life be in tune with the liturgy, in tune with the church, but to do it in a way that respects the circumstances of your life. So to kind of take the flexibility that makes sense in your context. So I'm really thinking that this new translation of the Liturgy of the Hours is a great moment for many people to be invited anew. There's simplified versions that have been made recently, like the Word on Fire booklets coming out, and I think the apps, they raise their own challenges in some ways, but they can make it easier for many people to pray. And I just think it's really a wonderful thing to be able to do, but to take it seriously, but not take it too seriously, I think is an important part of this. To be trying to be reasonable about what's the Lord calling you to, and how can you contribute to that.
Thank you. Another question. The exemplars of the treated manuscripts, I think that's the manuscripts you showed us, show the chant notation in the images, but not along with the texts of the Psalms themselves. So the question is, would the psalters actually used in the chanted office have had similarly ornate images in them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So some psalters would have antiphons written out with musical notation. Those ones, some of them are extremely beautifully illustrated. Some of them are more simple. But for the most part, the text of the Psalms was what you needed to sing them. So these books could have been used for singing, even though they don't have notation. So all of the Psalms would have been sung to relatively simple psalm tones, but the psalm tone would change based on what mode the antiphon was in. So part of the reason they avoid giving notation in lots of these is to make them really more flexible. So with you could really imagine these psalters being used for reciting the Psalms quietly, praying them reflectively, but also singing them even despite the lack of apparent musical notation. One thing I like to remind people sometimes is words are a form of musical notation because they help you remember something you've already heard. So I think to see the flexibility that a psalter allows is really important.
Great. Hugo says, thank you for the insightful presentation. I'm interested with the cultural and political influence within the depictions. Are there examples where cultural influences in Psalter imagery changed how certain psalms were interpreted by readers?
Yeah, that's a great question. There was a recent exhibit at the Morgan Library in New York, and they have a wonderful catalog presentation. That would be a great source to look at if you want to kind of delve more deeply into the illustration of Psalters. It was put together by Roger Wick, who sadly passed away recently, but he was a great scholar of medieval manuscripts, and he was able to show in that catalog just this wide range of traditional and also innovative ways of depicting the Psalms, and just this huge range of cultural traditions. So yeah, I would say the illustrations of Psalters as well as biblical books more broadly, they're often depicting the biblical scenes, but in ways that are familiar to the readers in a way. So, just with the ones we've seen, I mean, the difference between the Italian decoration and the French decoration in terms of how the clerics or how the other people are depicted, I think that's a little glimpse into the time and place. As I've said, we have to be critical. We don't know that these aren't photographs of the past, but they give us a kind of glimpse into a visual world that's otherwise hard to access.
Great. If any of our other participants have other questions, drop them in now. I'll ask one of my own. So I was struck, especially early on as you were going through that, the majority of the images you showed us depicted the Old Testament.
Mm.
Makes perfect sense that David would be depicted in the Psalms, right? Not knowing anything about these images, if you would have asked me in the blind, I would have perhaps thought there would have been more direct, explicit images of Christ for kind of
Mm.
a didactic purpose. But you kind of pointed out this almost a type. It's a suggesting a typological reading. So I'm wondering, is that pretty consistent throughout the manuscripts you've seen, that it tends to be Old Testament primarily? And do you think that this nudging towards a typological reading was intentional by the illuminators?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, with illustration of the Bible in general, one of the major ways illumination to depict Old Testament figures in the Old Testament and New Testament figures in the New Testament. But there's also this sense of the typological reading, this back and forth between the old and new. I think that's a kind of constant theme as well. So one thing for my doctoral dissertation, I got to study dozens and dozens of Bibles all over Europe and beyond, and some of them were highly decorated, and some of them were very simple. But what's amazing when you catalog these over and over again is the consistency, but also the freedom that artists had. So that I think there definitely is an intentionality. They're working within a tradition, but there's room for individual variation and creativity as well. So it's sometimes a little mystifying to figure out exactly what they're trying to depict. But I had to keep learning the Bible better in order to understand what these artists, were picking up on from the biblical stories. So it's really a rich area to study.
Sister Peter Thomas has two questions. The first is interesting. We'll see if you want to touch it. She says, I'm not aware of much detail on Word on Fire's forthcoming breviary set, but Ascension has been sharing some of the artwork being done by their publication by Ruth Strickland. She says, I don't know if you've seen some of those images, but if so, what are your initial impressions of these in relation to the tradition of art in these manuscripts, and in comparison to what we've had in our current breviaries? Are you familiar with any of that, Father Innocent?
Yeah, so I've seen some of those. So I think they're going. I appreciate that they're commissioning new art. I think there's a temptation sometimes to want to kind of just reproduce older images, and I think there can be a time and place for reproductions. But I appreciate what they're trying to do with getting an artist to do a whole consistent style. So yeah, I've been impressed with what I've seen so far. I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing all the details of the various editions for making my own choices or suggestions in the future. But yeah, it's great how much care these publishers are putting into their attempts to produce these books. I think anything will be a step forward in terms of the artistic inclusion compared to what we have right now. So I think that'll be a good thing.
And then Sister also asks, this is a great question. Has your scholarship with these manuscripts influenced your own prayer of the office? And do you have a favorite depiction among those you shared with us, other than the obvious choice of Dominicans beating Franciscans in the sand?
Yeah. Well, it was funny. So I am working with some colleagues on organizing a conference next year about the spoken and sung word in the liturgy, and we were talking at one point about how we need to have an image for our call for papers, a poster and everything, and so we were talking about different possibilities, and then it suddenly occurred to me, wait a minute, I'm giving a talk tonight about this, so that I showed them all my images, and we walked through them, and one of my colleagues said, "Oh yeah, that one with the altar and the tabernacle and the everything. That's what we need for our conference." So I'd say I grew an affection for that because it meant we didn't have to do quite as much work for finding another image. So yeah, I mean, how do these influence my own prayer? I would say. Uh, the range of images that you see of beautiful things, some of those really stick with you, and it's beautiful to surround yourself with sacred art, to take every opportunity you have to be immersed in this tradition, and I believe that sense of the multiplicity of the tradition that I mentioned earlier is such a rich theme here, that there is a canon of traditional iconography, and yet there's so much variation within it. So the kind of rule and invention that is available there, I think that's an inspiration for all of us in our own kind of following of the gospel, that Christ calls us to one path ultimately, but there's many different ways of getting there in a way.
Maybe we could do one more question, perhaps quickly. Father Innocent does have to go to another meeting, but Sister Mary Ruth asks, what is an interpretation of the strange pictures in the margins? Was that a sense of humor or just freedom?
Yeah. No, so as the Middle Ages go on, the margins of manuscripts get more and more bizarre. And it's really an interesting question, what's going on? So sometimes you get quite distracting images, or at least subjectively, one can be distracted by them. Scholars have different theories about this marginalia. So sometimes scholars have developed very sophisticated kind of typologies that these scenes in the margins actually are making a commentary on what's going on just on a kind of complex level. In other cases, I mean, I think we have to conclude that they're just having fun, and I think it's interesting that there's this range of personalities involved and range of humor. I'm reminded I'm in Rome at the moment, and I had the chance on St. Philip Neri's feast day to go to his rooms, and they had those open, and they've got all these little glimpses into his personality and a sense of humor, including this big effigy of himself made during his lifetime when he was too sick to go on a pilgrimage. He had this kind of life-size cardboard cutout made of himself to go around with. But St. Philip was famous for sometimes having a cat on his altar during Mass so that he could distract himself from his ecstasy so that he could finish saying Mass. And I wonder if, some of these weird depictions in medieval manuscripts, maybe in a way, the distraction of being reminded of the strangeness kind of helping you to come back to your senses and focus on the text. That's just one theory, but they're a lot of fun, whatever symbolism there may be.
Great. Well, on behalf of the board of directors and the entire Society of Catholic Liturgy, I'd like to thank Father Innocent for his lecture this afternoon. As a reminder to all of our participants, these online lectures on the Liturgy of the Hours lead up to our annual conference on the same topic to be held this September. Conference registration is open at liturgysociety.org/conference. There you're going to find registration information, including conference schedule, hotel discounts, and more information. Please visit the website of the Society for Catholic Liturgy, liturgysociety.org, for information about the conference, about membership in our society. And please do join us for the next online lecture at 3 p.m. Eastern on Thursday, June 18th, when Monsignor Mark Karen will address celebrating the hours in the diocesan and parochial context. Thank you all, and God bless.